It's almost incomprehensible how much $1 billion is. A person with a salary of $40,000 would take 25,000 years to earn that much. $1 billion is more than twice the GDP of some countries, and if you stacked that much in $1 bills, the stack would be almost 68 miles high. If you spent $20 every single second, it would still take 578 days to blow through $1 billion. It's such a vast amount of money. You'd think anyone who possesses $1 billion would be set for life, and they should be, but this is not always the case. There are some former billionaires who lost everything. Here are their ridiculous stories. Bjorgolfur Gudmundsson was the second person from Iceland to ever become a billionaire, with the first being his son. He has a history of being a shady businessman. At one point he ran Iceland's second largest shipping line, but in 1985 the line went bankrupt, and it came to light they had been misrepresenting earnings in the years leading up to it. Bjorgolfur and fellow executives were charged with 450 counts of fraud and embezzlement, but he was only given 12 months probation. It remains one of the biggest scandals in Icelandic history, with the shipping line taking massive loans to buy new ships so they could outcompete other lines. But with Iceland having such a small economy in those days, they never made enough money to pay off the loans. So they lied about earnings, until they were exposed. When this happened, the bank that loaned them the money collapsed. It also led to the downfall of the Icelandic finance minister, who was a shareholder in the shipping line. It was a big deal, but Bjorgólfur wasn't giving up. He moved to Russia and rebuilt his fortune by creating a brewery with his son. Bravo Brewery was another success for Bjorgólfur, and they eventually sold it for $400 million. There are rumors the Russian mafia helped them by intimidating other breweries into not competing with them, but we don't know how true that is. In 2002, they used their $400 million to buy a controlling share of Iceland's second largest bank. It was this move that made them billionaires. Taking its lead from other European economies, the Icelandic government massively deregulated and privatized its financial sector. This gave the result they were hoping for. Banks grew rapidly and investment flooded into Iceland, and so the net worth of Bjorgólfur and his son skyrocketed. They became famous as the most wealthy men in Iceland, and popular for their charitable donations. But this could only last so long. In 2008, the global banking crisis hit Iceland hard, just as it did in the US and UK. But in Iceland, the government refused to bail out the banks, as it disapproved of the investments they had made. With the country's banking system coming very close to a complete collapse, Bjorgólfur found himself over $700 million in debt and had to declare bankruptcy. At the time, it was the world's biggest personal bankruptcy on record. His fall from grace was a shock to many, with his financial empire seeming a lot more stable than it was. In 2015, Bjorgólfur was charged with massive fraud in a French court for his role in Icelandic banking. It's hard to see how his life could get much worse at this point, but I would expect fraud from a man with a nickname like Corporate Viking. Patricia Kluge was a billionaire heiress who rested comfortably on the largest divorce settlement in American history. She didn't start off wealthy but married the billionaire entrepreneur John Kluge. In the 1950s, he began buying stock in broadcasting companies. As TV and radio rapidly expanded in the following decades, his investments paid off. Reinvesting the profits, he eventually owned a controlling stake in the Metropolitan Broadcasting Corporation, which saw massive growth in the 1960s and 70s. The company came to own a variety of television stations, which they sold in 1986 to 20th Century Fox for $4 billion. This was 5 years after he had married Patricia. By the time of their divorce, he was the world's richest man, giving her a huge settlement including a 24,000 square foot mansion. But she would throw it all away like the human she is. She established a winery that was soon praised for its vintage bottles. It was going well, but then Patricia Kluge made the age-old mistake of expanding her business too quickly. She took out massive loans to buy more lands for wine production and build a luxury estate to rent out. But then in 2008, the financial crisis hit. Her business went under, and being unable to repay her loans was forced to sell her home. Her asking price was $100 million, but realistically she may as well have asked for a magic lamp. No one was buying. Eventually the price was lowered to $6.5 million and it was bought by Donald Trump. I'm not even joking, that really happened. Eike Batista was a massively successful oil mogul with a $30 billion fortune. He was the world's 7th most wealthy person in 2012, but just 2 years later he was $900 million in debt. As a young man, he was a gold trader, sourcing gold cheaply from the Amazon and selling it in big cities. This paid off and he used the profits to buy a series of gold and silver mines. As his fortune grew, he gained interests in natural gas and oil. It wasn't long before he was Brazil's richest man, growing with his country's economy, which was also built on natural resources. But when the precious metal business fell into decline and his oil company collapsed after failing to pump enough barrels, the value of his businesses fell fast. As his net worth was tied to the company's valuations, he soon lost everything. To make things worse, he was arrested in 2017 and charged with bribing politicians to secure access to resources, for which he was found guilty and is now in jail. Not a good few years for old Batista.